नारायणाय विद्महे वासुदेवाय धीमहि तन्नो विष्णुः प्रचोदयात्।
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishnapristhaya Bhutale Srimate Sridhar Deva Goswami Niti Namane Om Jnanatimarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Jai Shriman Narayana Jai Gurudeva. Very good. I was thinking what might be a nice thing to go over today, actually, is to talk a little bit about what are the Vedic scriptures. We've done this a few times, but a very, very long time ago. When I was the Acharya of the temple here, I used to teach a class called What is Hinduism? And one of the sessions that we would do would be precisely this, discussing what are the various scriptures of Sanatana Dharma. So we have done this in the past, but not for a very, very long time. And it's a very important topic for a variety of reasons. First, we talk about the scriptures all the time. We talk about the Vedic scriptures, the importance of the Vedic scriptures, how the Vedic scriptures work. But unfortunately, quite a few people are not necessarily as conversant as far as what precisely are the Vedic scriptures, what is meant by the Vedic scriptures. Even people who are very serious Hindus, actually, will very often get confused about all the various scriptures, all the various words and names that you hear. Shruti, Smriti, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, Vedas, this, that, so many different words, you know, and it kind of becomes a jumble in people's minds at some point. I often say that it is one of the greatest blessings, and in a way, a little mini curse, that we have so many scriptures. It's a little mini curse in that, well, of course, if you have so many scriptures, it gets confusing. It's hard to keep in one's memory what all these scriptures are, you know. But then, of course, there's the idea that, well, since there are so many scriptures in Sanatana Dharma, oh my Lord, does this mean I have to read them all? You know? And for a person who loves reading, for a person who loves spirituality, of course, it's wonderful to read them all. But for most people, let's face it, it would be pretty daunting, the idea of reading hundreds and hundreds of volumes, many of which an individual volume will be as large as the Bible, the entire Bible combined. So the idea of having to read all these works, again, can be either daunting or, if a person likes reading, very nice, but still it's a lot. The blessing, of course, of having so many scriptures in Sanatana Dharma is this. And I'll give a little background leading up to the explanation. One of a myriad of factors that makes Sanatana Dharma radically different from every spiritual tradition on earth. And let us not fool ourselves or anyone about this. Sanatana Dharma is in hundreds of ways radically different from every spiritual tradition on earth. Radically different. More, it serves as the source material philosophically, as far as literature, in many ways, of these later traditions. But one of the ways in which Sanatana Dharma is different is precisely this. The scriptures of most religions will tend to deal with one or maybe a small number of topics, you know, and primarily theology and philosophy, metaphysics, you know. With Sanatana Dharma, on the other hand, because Sanatana Dharma is more than merely, quote unquote, a religion, more than merely a spiritual path, but rather a way of life, an entire culture. You know, we need to keep in mind that this is the literature of an entire civilization that spanned the globe at one time. Not just, quote unquote, India, but the entire globe. We find remnants of the Veda in Ireland, in Russia. To this day, there's something called the Russian Veda. which was a Russian version of the Veda, written approximately the 9th century, and which we have remnants of today. So when we talk about the Veda, we're talking about a global culture and civilization. That being the case, and more so because it is recognized by the Vedic worldview that truth is something that cannot be boxed in merely into the fields of religion and philosophy, but which must touch upon every single aspect of what it means to be in the world. Think of any category. Think of literally cooking, how to cook. Think of medicine. Think of any science that you can mention. Think of mathematics. Think of architectures. Think of city planning. Think of archery. There is something called Dhanur Veda. Has anyone heard of this work? Dhanur. Does anyone know what Dhanur means?
Donation?
No. Close. No.
Bow and arrow?
Bow and arrow. There is a scripture on archery. There is a scripture on archery. I like to bring that one up very specifically because that kind of surprises people sometimes. What? How can archery be spiritual? Oh, it can. It can. The idea of archery as a form of meditation is still carried on in the Zen tradition to this day. The idea that you do archery not merely as a way of harming people, but on the contrary, you do it as a skill, as a way to build concentration, as a way to focus the mind, focus the awareness. And you may never use that archery in all of your life to harm any living being, but it's a discipline of meditation in and of itself. Again, you find this to this day in the Zen tradition, where Zen archery is very, very important. But where did this start? Thousands of years before the word Zen even existed, in this Dhanur Veda. So what is the point? The point is that Sanatana Dharma is a worldview that is meant to spiritualize every aspect of the human experience. How you drink water can be spiritualized, according to Sanatana Dharma. How? When you drink water, you remember this verse from the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna saying, I am the taste of water. You see, so even as you're drinking water, you can be thinking this taste that is there, that is the divine, that is causing that taste, that is the source of that taste. So, quite literally with everything that we do, everything can be spiritualized. Now, keeping this principle in mind, this is why there are so many hundreds and hundreds of scriptures in the Vedic corpus, in the Vedic literature. Because it is understood that all of life can be spiritualized, therefore, there has to be a science by which every aspect of life can be conducted and engaged in such a way that rather than just drinking water, rather than just eating food, rather than just cooking, rather than just building a structure, you can do all those things, you'll have the same result materially, but understanding the metaphysics behind the very action, the very karma action in which you are engaged, you can then spiritualize those activities. You can literally create a building in such a way that it now has a spiritual effect. You know, this idea of feng shui in Chinese comes from Sthapatya Veda, the idea of Vedic architecture, the idea of literally creating buildings and environments in such a way that you make the most of the natural energies that are there in the environment, and thus make it into a place where when you walk into the building, you feel now as if you're walking on clouds. You know? Have you ever had this experience? You walk into a building, a house, someone's apartment, someplace, and as soon as you walk in, you just feel, ugh, oh my Lord, I don't want to be here. And then other places where, again, you walk in and you feel the opposite. You feel this light, brightness, and just this wonderful elevating energy. Well, there is a science for how to create the latter, how to create buildings in such a way that when you walk in, you feel alive, you feel healthy. You know? So, this is why there are so many different scriptures, because they deal with every single aspect of the human experience. All right? So, what I thought we would do today briefly is go over the various terms that I have on this board. And trust me, this is the tip of the iceberg. There are more scriptures. And these, except for two of these are not individual scriptures. These are titles of genres of literature. So within each of these titles, there are many, many, many books. So we'll quickly go through this. And actually, I'm sorry, before we start, let me say one more quick thing. And that is the importance of scriptures, because this is something I haven't mentioned yet. There are 3 ways in which we can know truth. And you'll remember a few weeks ago I did a talk on the Vedic way of knowing God. And I went through this a little bit. And I'm going to mention three other routes for knowing God. I mentioned 3 what are called pramanas before. 3 epistemic mechanisms. That is pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda. Empiricism, reasoning, but then essentially what's called the divine word, transcendence, accessing transcendence directly. And that's how we know God very specifically. Those are pramanas. Those are epistemologies for knowing God. Okay? They deal with the person. Very practically, the way that we can know truth is by 3 other categories. These are Shastra, Acharya, and Vichara. Okay? Shastra simply means scripture. Acharya means the guru, the living person, the guide. And Vichara means one's own intelligence. Now, interestingly, there is an important dynamic that exists between all 3 of these. For something to be true, it must basically be in accordance with all 3 of these simultaneously. And if one is missing, then there's something wrong. So, if someone gives you a statement, such and such is the truth, what you need to do is first see if that is in the scripture. Also, you need to verify it with the guru, but also, ultimately, you also need to use your own intelligence, your own intuition, your own gut feeling. You need to use the tools that you have individually. And if it is something that's true, it will correspond to all 3 of these. You know? If a person has a guru, quote unquote, and I think everyone here will know the answer to this if you know me at all and what I've taught in the past. If one has a quote-unquote guru, and the guru says, so-and-so, such and such is the truth, okay? But when the guru tells you this, a feeling comes over to you. No, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. That's not logical. But then more than that, you go to the scriptures, and you read the scriptures, and the scriptures tell you the opposite of what the guru just told you. Okay? That's the scenario. What should this tell you? Yes, absolutely. It's not true. It should tell you that what the guru says is not true, but more. What else should it tell you?
That the guru is deluded.
Yes. Moha, delusion. The word is moha, delusion, deluded. The guru is deluded. You said it very well. That person who is claiming to be a guru cannot be a guru because they have said something that is contradicted by scripture and even by your own intelligence. You see? So this is how we know the truth. This is how we keep from being cheated. This is how we know whether a person truly is a guru or is not a guru. Later today, actually, finally, we're going to be releasing another very nice video. It's almost 40 minutes long on precisely how to recognize an authentic guru. And we'll be sending out the announcement later this evening. We have it almost finished, almost edited and done. And this is one of the ways in which you know that an individual truly is a guru. If they say something and it's not logical, it doesn't make sense, you know, it just does not jive with your own intelligence, your own gut feeling. But more, if you challenge that guru's statement, okay, where is that in the scriptures? Wait a minute, I've just read the Bhagavad Gita, it says literally the opposite. And if the guru then cannot reconcile the utterance that came out of their mouth with what is there in scripture, then you have to, at that point, question the guru. So you see, what's nice about this system, is that there are checks and balances. There are checks and balances that are there. And this is a crucial aspect of Sanatana Dharma that almost no one knows about, in the Western world especially. It's so unfortunate, and you know, those who have been to my talks in the past, that this is one of my pet peeves, blind faith. This is not a system of blind faith, including blind faith in the guru. It is not. And there are too many gurus out there who will just literally say anything they want with no knowledge of the scriptures, And the disciples will just follow it blindly. They won't question it. And what they don't understand is this is Sanatana Dharma. It is a system. It is a worldview that is so scientific, that is so deep, that is so advanced, that even for understanding and recognizing truth, there are checks and balances. And even if your own guru says something and it is not supported by the scriptures or logic, nyaya, then that means you need to question the guru. You need to question whether that person truly is what they claim to be. Very important. See, we're protected here. Very, very important. We are protected, yes.
But these scriptures are so extensive. Who is vetting the scriptures to make sure that they're all a consistent body of truth? I could say maybe later writings such as the Book of Mormon, or the Bible as interpreted by the Prophet Muhammad, should be part of the Vedas.
Okay, good question. Very good question. Several things to say about this. First, let's talk about the problem of the vastness of scriptures. Because it's true. Let's say the guru says something, it doesn't make sense. Again, are you going to go through all the hundreds of works of literature to check? No, you don't need to. The tradition in Vedanta and yoga and all the spiritual traditions of Sanatana Dharma rely on a small number of scriptures, not the totality of these scriptures. Very specifically, what's called the Prasthana Traya. Three sets of scriptures. Traya means three. Comes from tri, where we get the word three, interestingly. Yeah, a lot of modern languages derive directly from Sanskrit. It's amazing. But these three scriptures are Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutras, and the Upanishads. And even with the Upanishads, not all of the Upanishads, the most important 12 Upanishads. So to check the general teachings of yoga and Vedanta that the guru claims to be teaching is actually not as daunting a task as we would think. This is the other thing. When we say scripture, when we use very specifically the term shastra, which is a Sanskrit term, it means something very specific. And that's what we're going to get to. It means one of two things, shruti or smriti. It doesn't mean anything that a person just claims to be scripture. The Book of Mormon, and I say this without wanting to offend anyone whatsoever, I'm speaking about my tradition, our tradition of Sanatana Dharma. You know, in our tradition, the Book of Mormon is not scripture. It's not enough that someone simply claims, okay, well, there's this book, it's my scripture, therefore it must be accepted as scripture for all beings. No, the Book of Mormon may be scripture for Latter-day Saints, for Mormons. It's not scripture for us. We don't accept the Book of Mormon. Likewise, we don't accept the Old Testament. We don't accept most of the New Testament. Frankly, strictly speaking, in Sanatana Dharma, even the New Testament is not accepted. I personally accept those portions of the Gospels that are the utterances and direct actions of Jesus. And that's something that I and a few of the more, let's say, insightful gurus do, because we understand Jesus as a perfect Dharma master. But even there, we're very careful. So I need to be blunt. We do not accept the Old Testament as scripture whatsoever. Most of the New Testament we do not accept. We do not accept Paul. We do not accept Revelations. We do not accept the epistles. Even with the Gospels, we only accept those portions that are the direct words and actions of Jesus. We do not accept the Quran in any way, shape, or form. We accept the Tao Te Ching, and even this is something that for very orthodox Vaidikas, very orthodox followers of the Vedas, would be a somewhat controversial statement, but I'm going to make it because I understand the Tao Te Ching better than they do. We accept the Tao Te Ching as a Dharma Shastra. And in a little while you'll see I even have that term on here. I'll explain what a Dharma Shastra is. That is a work that explains the metaphysics of Dharma. If you read the Tao Te Ching, it is a work of pure Dharma in the direct sense of understanding the metaphysics of the natural law. That's what Tao means. You know, Tao comes from Dharma. It means the exact same thing. So we do not accept world scriptures. We accept the Vedic scriptures. And the Tao Te Ching as a Dharma Shastra. and the words and actions of Jesus. Even with the Buddhist literature, we don't accept the Buddhist literature as scripture, as shastra in the strict sense of the term. And trust me, this is not a book plug, but this is the only way for people to understand this in a very deep way. If you want to understand the exact definition and mechanism of Shastra, please get the Vedic Way of Knowing God, because this book explains it quite literally better than any work in the English language. Okay? So does that answer your question somewhat? Yeah. Okay. Now, what are the three ways in which we verify truth?
Sanatana Acharya and mind.
Right, vichara.
Vichara.
Very good, vichara. Very good. All right. Shastra. Shastra yonitvat. Shastra yonitvat. This is the third aphorism of the Brahma Sutras of Vyasadeva. We've heard of the Brahma Sutras. It's the foundation of Vedanta. Well, the first four sutras are the most important. The third one is Shastra Yonidvat. And it says there very specifically that Shastra is the source of that. And that is referring to the previous verses. Shastra is the source of that knowledge of the Absolute. Okay? So the Brahma Sutra says this very specifically. Now let's talk about what precisely is Shastra. Okay? Now again, when we talk about the Vedic Shastra or the Vedic scriptures, and I'm translating Shastra as scriptures very, very tenuously. Very tenuously. With many of these Sanskrit words, it's really difficult to translate them into English, but let's just use the word scripture for now. Really, Shastra is an epistemic mechanism. It is a direct route by which we can perceive that which is imperceivable. Okay? But let's just use the word scriptures for now, because we understand that word. When we talk about the Shastra, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of works. All right? Generally speaking, all these hundreds of works fall into one of two categories. See? So again, they're categorized very, very nicely. Very simply, this is Shruti and Smriti. And you'll notice on the board, I have these two headings. Shruti, Smriti. Shruti means that which is heard. Shruta, that which is heard. Smriti means that which is remembered. Very simple. And then all the scriptures fall under one of those two categories. Now let me explain what is the difference between these two. You remember when we spoke about how scripture is revealed. It's revealed to ordinary human beings who become yogis, and as a result of their intense sadhana, their intense spiritual practice of meditation, of yoga, pranayama, but more than anything, bhakti, devotion to the divine, they eventually purify their minds, purify their hearts. They transcend ego, ahankara. They come to the stage of self-realization. They come to the stage of atma-jnana, but then more, they come to this higher stage of God consciousness, Brahma Vidya, what's called Brahma Vidya in Bhagavad Gita. At this point, they become transparent via mediums. They become literally like a window to the spiritual world. They have the ability to now perceive truth perfectly, without adulteration, without this brick wall of ego covering their perception. But more than this, not only do they have the ability to perceive that truth, they now have the ability to reveal that truth to others. Now, how do they perceive this truth? It's in the form of sound, shabda. This is why this is so important. When we say sound, initially we're not talking about the kind of sound that you hear audibly with the ear. This is anahata sound. This is sound that doesn't make noise materially. It is spiritual sound vibration. The term is literally anahata. Hatha means sound that is produced by the striking together of two things. That's vibration. Okay? This sound is brought about not by the striking of any two things, not by material vibration. It's eternal sound. It's constant. It is frozen for eternity. It is literally what in Latin, what in the biblical sense would be called logos. This is the logos. This is the logos. This is the divine sound, the divine word. All right? Now, again, this is where we get the first word, shruti. The rishi hears this sound, again, not audibly, but in their consciousness. And we only use the word here because it is a sound vibration, a transcendental sound vibration, but really it's perceived. Okay, but we use the word here anyway. Once that is heard, once that sound vibration of truth is right then and there immediately put down onto paper, those are the scriptures that become shruti. Okay? We understand that? Now, when on the other hand, this rishi goes through that same process that I just described, they perceive that divine sound vibration, but it's not immediately written down. Instead, that rishi, who is an acharya, will give that sound vibration to their disciple. They will give it to their disciple, and that will go on for longer or shorter periods of time, depending on that succession. Remember last time, parampara. And when it is eventually written down, you see, that is what is remembered. Thus, smriti. Does that make sense? Okay, so very simply, those scriptures that are heard by the rishi writes them down very quickly. That is shruti. If it goes on for several generations, that is smriti. It's remembered. All right. Now, let's look at both of these. And actually, I should say also, generally speaking, very generally speaking, shruti is considered to be slightly more reliable than smriti. They're both important. They're both scripture. They're both perfect. However, because of the nature of how they're revealed, that's where the differentiation is. And this is why shruti is considered to be slightly more reliable than smriti. So these four genres are extremely important, and that's the reason why. So let's deal with these. The first genre is Veda itself. The word Veda is interesting. It has many different meanings. Number one, the literal meaning is simply knowledge. From the verb root vid, meaning to know, it means that which is known or knowledge. It's, I believe, the past passive participle in Sanskrit. It means knowledge, very simply. It also is referring specifically to the greater Vedic literature. So basically any Shastra is considered to be Veda. All right? Even the Bhagavad Gita, literally anything that you see mentioned here is also considered Veda because it is the Vedic literature. It is literature that reveals knowledge. All right? The third sense in which we have this word Veda is referring to this specific genre of literature called the Vedas. And these are 4 books. Okay? Rig, Atharva, Yajur, and Samaveda. You don't have to bother writing those down. But those are the 4 Vedas. The 4 Vedas are considered to be, let's say, vibrationally the most sacred and most important scriptures in all of Sanatana Dharma. Vibrationally. And not as far as delivering philosophical knowledge, but rather as far as having the ability to hear, meditate upon these sound vibrations, and achieve liberation. Okay? This is why recitation of the Veda specifically is very important. All right? Let's go on. The Brahmanas. The Brahmanas are another set of scriptures, and maybe you'll remember when we spoke a few weeks ago, quite some time ago at this point, about what is a Brahmana in the sense of what is a priest. You know, again, I mentioned how this word can get confused because you have Brahman, who is God. You have Brahmana, meaning a priest. You have Brahmana, meaning a book. Well, now we're talking about the book. Okay? And these are several books. It's debatable as far as how many there are. So that's not so important. But what these books are basically rituals that are derived from the Vedas, from the 4 Vedas. Okay? For our intents and purposes today, practically they're not very important. They are sacred scripture, but they're not very practically important for us, because in this age, ritual is not the primary means for knowing the divine. Plus, the rituals are too complex for humans to do today. We can do them, but it would mean that we'd have to quit our jobs, basically. Some of these rituals quite literally go on for weeks and require 4 brahmanas sitting there full time and doing mantras, doing rituals, very complex. Plus, we're honestly not even pure enough to do these mantras. We don't have the focus. We don't have the concentration. How many people have the ability to sit for 16 hours a day for 2 weeks, saying mantra, doing ritual, throwing the correct substances into a yajna in the correct sequence with absolute unbreakable concentration? Not many. Most of us can't sit on the floor for an hour. What to speak of 16 hours a day for 2 weeks. So that's why brahmanas are not as important for us today. Aranyakas. Aranyakas mean the forest texts. Aranya means forest. The reason why they're called that is because these were revealed in the forest. Truthfully, they all were. All the scriptures were. But these very specifically were especially revealed in the forest at a certain point in the history of Sanatana Dharma, where the city life became especially hellish, and the rishis had no choice but to go to the forest. These scriptures are a bridge between the Brahmanas and the Upanishads. They have within them, they contain both a lot of ritual knowledge, but also philosophy as well. Okay, so they serve more as a bridge. Finally, we have the Upanishads. Of all 4 of these genres, it's definitely the Upanishads that is the most important. It's the Upanishads that are the most philosophical of all of these. Upanishad, 3 terms. It means sitting close to. Sitting close to, that's the literal meaning of Upanishad. And why is it called that? Who here remembers? Because we mentioned that once or twice. Why is it called that, sitting close to?
Because of the way in which the teachings were passed down orally from guru to disciple.
Exactly, yes. The idea is that these are all dialogues in which the disciple, or sometimes several disciples, sit at the feet of the guru. See, so sit next to, sit close to the guru, and they are dialogues. They are teachings of various sages, various rishis. These are the Upanishads. There are 108 Upanishads officially. And of the 108, there are, depending on who you listen to, 12 or 14 that are of most importance. I accept personally that there are 12 of most importance. And some of them are very well known. Isha Upanishad, Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Narayana Upanishad, Shvetashvatara Upanishad. There are quite a few of them, and not long ago we went through some of these Upanishads in our scriptures class, especially when we were still with the temple. So the Upanishads, for our intents and purposes in this day and age, are the most important of all these Shruti literatures, because it's the most philosophical, it's the most accessible, it is the most practical, and it is Vedanta. It is Vedanta. Who knows what the word Vedanta means?
End of the Vedas.
Yes, end of the Vedas, culmination of the Vedas. Veda, and then Anta. Anta means the end or the culmination. So Veda, Anta, the A becomes long, Vedanta. Vedanta. All right? That's what the Upanishads is called, the teachings of the Upanishads. They are the end, the culmination of the Vedanta, meaning that if you understand the teachings of the Upanishads, you understand the Veda in every sense that I mentioned before. In every sense. Okay? But more, sequentially, it comes at the very end. So even in that sense, it's the end of the Shruti literature, the last works of the Shruti literature. Okay? Now, let's deal with the Smriti a little bit, the Smriti literature. And again, the Smriti literature, truthfully, is as important and as authoritative as the Shruti literature. The differentiation as far as reliability is really not that important. It's a technicality, really. The Smriti literature is also very important. The first two terms that you'll see that I have up here are Mahabharata and Ramayana. These two go together. They are called the Itihasa. Itihasa means the epics. These are both epics. For truly great ancient civilizations all had epics, epic literature. You have the Iliad and the Odyssey. You have the Aeneid. You have the Eddas, the Norse Eddas. You have the Epic of Gilgamesh. And there are many others. Kalevala, which you have in Finland, what was Finland and what now is a part of Russia, I believe. You have these epic literatures. And I don't want to go too deeply into what constitutes epic literature, because that would make this class a little bit longer. But as far as the study of literature, Mahabharata and Ramayana are considered to be epics. The Mahabharata, very specifically, what does that term mean? Does anyone know?
Great Bharata.
Yes. Maha means great. Bharata. What is Bharata referring to?
India.
Yeah, okay. Yes and no. Of course, 5,000 years ago, there was no such thing as India per se, especially with the political boundaries that it has today. Rather, Bharata was referring to something greater. Now, of course, Indians refer to the modern nation state of India as Bharat, the Hindiized version, Bharat. But really, it's referring to the entire earth. At one time, Bharata meant the earth planet. It meant Bhudevi. It meant the entire earth. So it is the history of the greatest human-caused cataclysm that occurred on the earth, and that was the great Mahabharata War. The Mahabharata War really happened. It was an absolute concrete fact. We know this because we even have ancient writings, I believe Roman writings, Chinese writings from thousands of years ago that even mentioned this war. This was a real war that took place. It was the first world war in history. It was a war of dharma versus adharma, very clearly good versus evil. And it is a war in which Krishna himself was present. In this war, before the battle actually takes place, that took place for 18 days, Krishna and Arjuna sit on the battlefield in absolute stillness with pure potentiality there, with two armies, with millions of soldiers on either side facing each other. Imagine this pure potentiality. They're just waiting to descend upon each other. These skilled warriors with thousands of war elephants, the tanks of the ancient world, with war chariots, just waiting. But before this carnage happened, there was peace. And the armies are waiting, and Krishna and Arjuna are there in the center of the battlefield. Doing what? Before the carnage, discussing truth. It's the most amazing thing. It's the most amazing thing. When you think of just the drama of this, the juxtaposition that on the one hand we're going to see death on a scale that is unimaginable, but at the same time, before all this happens, you have its opposite, juxtaposed, to show exactly that juxtaposition of the spiritual versus the material, of peace versus violence, of the selfless versus the selfish, you see. So, people will sometimes very immaturely ask, oh, well, what kind of a scripture is this? Aren't scriptures supposed to take place on mountaintops and, things like that? Why does this take place in the middle of the battlefield? That's why. To show that juxtaposition that is there. So, Bhagavad Gita is actually a part of the Mahabharata. And this is something that not everyone may necessarily know. We tend to think today of Bhagavad Gita as a scripture of its own, just on its own, which now it is. Now, truthfully, it is because it's so important. But it really comprises 18 chapters of the Mahabharata, of this great work. Mahabharata is the longest epic ever written. in the history of humanity. For anyone who has studied the Iliad and the Odyssey, the two Greek, ancient, very, very famous Greek epics, and I studied them at Loyola University very in depth, wrote several papers about them. The Iliad and the Odyssey are big books. The Mahabharata is, what is it? I believe something like 10 times larger. 7 times?
I think that's what I heard.
Okay, 7 times larger than Iliad and Odyssey combined. So this is a big book. Mahabharata contains all sorts of things in it. It has stories, it has lessons about Dharma, some very, very famous stories, including one in which, and without going into a lot of background, Yudhishthira, who is the person who is meant to become the king of the earth. He's in exile at this point, and he is in front of a lake that is alive and asking him philosophical questions, quandary questions. And after a series of amazing questions and answers, the likes of which you have never seen and you've never heard if you haven't read this, finally this lake asks him, Yudhishthira, one last question. What is the most wondrous thing in this world? Does anyone know what Yudhishthira answers?
That everyone thinks they are going to live forever.
Yes, that everyone sees everyone that they know around them dying, but they think, oh, but I am immortal. They think that they're just going to live forever. That's the most wondrous thing. That is the heart of Maya, of illusion. Thinking that we are this body. Thinking that, yes, all the little empires that I build, all the wealth that I accumulate, everything that I accumulate in this world, it will just go on forever. Even though I see everyone else's little mini empires collapsing. I think that, oh, mine will go on forever. And we don't understand. No, I am just as mortal as everyone else. And rather than trying to build many empires, instead, let me turn within and touch and know that which is eternal. Yeah. So that's Mahabharata. And the entire work is like that. It's an amazing work. Okay, Ramayana. Ramayana. The Ramayana was revealed by Valmiki, the sage, the Rishi Valmiki. And it is the story of Rama. Of Rama. And you'll remember, not long ago, we celebrated the appearance day, Ram Navami, the appearance day of Lord Rama. We spoke about him a little bit, so we won't go too in depth today. But the Ramayana is his story. And this book is, I believe, 24,000 verses, something like that. Very, very large. It's at least as large as the complete Old and New Testament combined. So those are the two epics. Now let's go on. There is another genre of literature called the Puranas. The Puranas are the histories of, fill in the blank. Oh, come on, you know it. The Puranas are histories, and they are histories of, no?
Of the gods and your adventure.
That too. That's in there. Some people say the world. That's not true. Of the cosmos. It is the history of our cosmos. It is the history of our entire world, but it also includes even the histories of several other planets. That's how expansive these works are. There are 36 Puranas. Of those, there are 18 major ones, 18 minor ones. Of those, the most important ones are the 6 Puranas that are sattvika in nature, that focus on Vishnu, on Narayana. Of those 6, arguably the most important is Bhagavata Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam. It is called the Amala Purana. It's called the Spotless Purana. The reason why is because this Purana, more than any of the others, focuses exclusively on God. Bhagavata Purana, sometimes called Srimad Bhagavatam. In the 10th canto, there are 12 cantos in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The 10th one is the longest. It's massive. It's 90 chapters. It focuses exclusively on the life story of Krishna, the last avatar. The last avatar, Bhagavan Sri Krishna. All right, let's go on a little bit more. The sutras, the sutra literature. And again, you've heard me speak about this a little bit in the past. These are the primary texts, the revelatory, revealing, foundational texts of all the schools of philosophy in Sanatana Dharma. Each school of philosophy has a sutra. Sutra means thread. Means thread. And each of these sutras is revealed by a rishi. Okay? Some of the sutras are, for example, the Brahma Sutras, the Yoga Sutras, Nyaya Sutras, which deal with logic. Okay? Sankhya Sutras, which don't exist anymore. We literally don't have them. We have lost them, or at least we don't have access to them anymore. Narada Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras. So there are a lot of them. And what makes these sutra literature, what makes this sutra literature different from the other literature, several things, but the most important for our purposes is the form of these books, how the books literally are written. They're written in very short code. Literally code. The reason why they're code is for a few reasons. Number one, so that they're easy to memorize, so this knowledge will never be lost. You know, there are people who literally are walking books. They have the Brahma Sutras memorized. There are people who have the Yoga Sutras memorized. Ashtadhyayi. Ashtadhyayi is another sutra literature that is the rules, the Paninian rules of Sanskrit grammar. It's not called a sutra, but it is a sutra literature. Ashtadhyayi, it's called. That's a longer one. Essentially, if you have the entire Ashtadhyayi memorized, you have memorized every single grammatical rule of Sanskrit. That's how you learn Sanskrit traditionally. That's how I learned it, in addition to learning it in the standard academic way. Okay? So, that's the sutra literature. Next, Pancharatras. Pancharatras are literatures that are a little bit more difficult to explain, and I'll try to just explain them very, very briefly because I don't want this talk to be too long. The Pancharatra literatures deal very specifically with the science of devotion and the science of temple worship and murti worship as meditation. As meditation. Who was here a few weeks ago when, before we did the puja, I spoke a little bit about what is the meaning of puja and how puja is meant to be meditation? Who was here for that? Okay, a few people. Very good. Well, again, without going very in depth and repeating a talk that I already gave, the idea is that in expressing devotional consciousness, specifically devotion, bhakti, and in practicing bhakti yoga, there are very specific scientific techniques that are used. So, for example, employing murti, or what sometimes is called a statue or icon. We never use the word idol. We're not idol worshippers. Idol means a false image. We don't worship false images. We worship images that are revealed by rishis, beings who perfected themselves. So that's one aspect, murti worship, that's used as meditation, but also everything having to do with temple and temple ritual. And again, not in the sense of ritualism, simply empty ritual that's meaningless. No, the idea of ritual as meditation. Ritual as done in such a way that your full intentionality is there, and with every mantra that you're saying, with every offering that you are giving, you are using this as a sadhana to both glorify God, but also elevate yourself spiritually and yogically. This is what's discussed in the Pancharatra. All right? Very, very esoteric literature. That's why you maybe have never heard of this before, this literature. Very little of it is translated. It's just too esoteric for most Westerners. Now, Dharma Shastras. Dharma Shastras. There is a group of literature, 7 I believe of which are the most important. And these are considered to be Dharma Shastra literature. These deal very specifically with what is Dharma and the rules and regulations of Dharma. These are literally the law books of Sanatana Dharma. There are many of them. The most well-known in the Western world is Manava Dharma Shastra, what sometimes is called the Manusmriti. Manusmriti. Unfortunately, there are, I believe, 3 translations that, I believe it's either 2 or 3. They are all horrific translations. They are horrible translations. I've read parts of it in the original Sanskrit. These people who translated the Manava Dharma Shastra Manusmriti into English, I know there are German versions, but I don't read German. At least the people who translated this work into English were morons. They did not know what they were doing in any way whatsoever. They mistranslated words entirely. They basically tried to translate this into almost the equivalent of King James Version of English, and it just does not work. As a result, don't even bother trying to read any current translations of the Manusmriti. You'll feel like you're reading Leviticus or something. You'll feel like you're reading just very old English, just very, very badly done. But the Dharma Shastras, as a genre of literature, as a corpus of literature, are very important because they deal with law, they deal with ethical principles, they deal with various rules and regulations in accordance with the diversity of humanity. So rules and regulations for priests, for brahmanas, rules and regulations for students, rules and regulations for married people, for celibate people, for sannyasis, for just a wide variety of different sorts of human beings. And it's interesting how this code of law recognizes both the universal and the specific. So there are certain laws and rules and regulations that are considered to be valid for all humanity, but then, interestingly, and this is something that you very rarely find, especially in the modern world, there are laws for specific groups of people. So if you are a brahmana, if you are a person whose life is governed and regulated by study of the Shastra, by teaching, etc., you have a slightly different set of principles and do's and don'ts than you would if, let's say, you were a Shudra or a laborer, And then married people have a slightly different set of regulations than there would be for people who are celibate, or people who, let's say, who are teenagers pre-marriage. So it's a fascinating work of literature. And again, it's a set of scriptures that is not very well known in the Western world. Again, Sanatana Dharma is still a tradition that is slightly new to Western minds. And when we say slightly new, I mean we've been in contact with it for over 200 years. The first Bhagavad Gita was translated in the late 1700s into English. So it may sound like a long time that Westerners have been studying and translating and commenting and speculating on these various books, but it's not long enough. And unfortunately, especially with the more obscure books like the Pancharatras, like the Dharma Shastras, because they're considered more obscure, there are very few translations, and the translations were all done a very long time ago, over 100 years ago. So as a result, not a lot of attention has been paid to them. So in the future, we need to retranslate these important scriptures, And that's why also, just generally speaking, both in how I teach, but other authentic gurus as well, that's why we don't go very deeply into these scriptures, is because they do deal more with knowledge that's more on the peripheries, not knowledge that we need immediately, to become better people, to know God, etc. It's interesting, but it's very technical. It's very technical. All right.
Is the law in India based somewhat on that?
It used to be a long time ago. Now it's based on British law. Yeah. Now it's based on British law. Previous to the Islamic incursions, yes, all of law, not just in India, all law in all of South Asia, but also in large parts of Southeast Asia as well. A lot of the law in pre-colonial Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, all these places were based on the Dharma Shastras. Then the Muslims came and conquered, and then of course in North India it became more Sharia. Then the British came, then it became British law. And the British themselves were fascinated by this. That's why they were among the first people to begin translating these works. Again, they did a lousy job, a truly horrible job, but they were among the first people to begin translating these works. Unfortunately, they wanted to know these works for a very bad reason. You know the history of this? Yeah. Essentially, they wanted to get into the psyche of the Hindu, as they would say, so they could conquer them. That was the idea. That's why the British were so fascinated by Indology, by Sanskrit, by all these things. Max Muller, who was maybe the most famous of them, stated it very bluntly in a letter that he sent to a relative, I forget if it was a sister or somebody, where he said, yes, it is crucial that we in the British Empire learn Sanskrit and translate all these words into the English language so we can penetrate the mind of these pagan Hindus so we can convert them to the true way, to Christianity. That was the motivation of all these early Indologists, and that's why, unfortunately, a lot of their translations are extremely bad. I mean, I didn't want to go into this, but frankly, a lot of it was mistranslated on purpose to make this literature sound barbaric. To the minds of a lot of the British and German and French Indologists, the Hindus were just an animalistic, barbaric race of people. And their only goal was to learn as much as possible about them so they could convert them to Christianity. And they state that bluntly. It's stated very bluntly by all these people. And it's very sad. It's very unfortunate, especially when you read something as philosophically profound as Bhagavad Gita, for example. And you understand that as far as these early 18th, 19th century Indologists were concerned, this was just the utterance of little primitive savages. And yet it is philosophy that's so profound that we could take one verse and discuss it philosophically from an ontological, ethical, epistemological perspective for 3 months. That's how philosophically profound this literature is. But that's the nature of bigotry. That's the nature of prejudice. When you're convinced my way is the best way and the only way. So.
That's appalling because even somebody as respected as Swami Vivekananda spoke very highly of Max Muller and praised him as almost a sannyasi.
Sure, he didn't read that letter that he wrote. See, all this information came out decades after Max Muller was gone, after Vivekananda was gone. So all that, yes, it's fascinating. When Max Muller was alive, Hindu leaders loved him. They thought, oh my God, this was a man who, he must love our scriptures so much to translate our works into the English language. They didn't understand what his actual motivation was. And really, you could only understand it if you knew them. You would only know what his real motivations were if you met him, knew him, or if decades later you finally read what his private thoughts were. Not just his actual books, not just his actual written material, but the private little letters that he wrote to colleagues, to relatives, where basically he states that he considers all this to be garbage. It's amazing how much these people, these early Indologists, damaged our understanding of Sanatana Dharma. So for example, when it comes to the Vedas, the Rig Veda specifically, if you go to almost any academic source, they will claim that the Rig Veda was written approximately 1400 BC. That's nonsense. It goes back to at least 3800 BC in written form. Before that, it was orally carried down for no one knows how long. Why did they come about this idea of 1400 BC? Well, that comes from Max Muller directly. He's the first person to postulate this date. And why? Again, Vivekananda wouldn't know, because he doesn't state this in any of his written works, but in his private letters to people, he states that the reason why I came up with 1400 BC is because that is after the flood of Noah, and it's impossible that this literature or any literature could have been written pre-Noah. So it was his own biblical prejudice. Even though the literature itself gives the date, even though the astronomical evidence that's there in the literature where it maps the stars, and if you correspond that astronomically, you know, very easily by their positioning the stars in the literature, you can tell what year they were talking about. We know it's 3800 BC. But in his mind, these are savages. How could they have written literature before we had our Bible? How can they have a literature that goes back 3800 BC, 3800 years before Jesus? That's an impossibility. That would mean they have a greater source of knowledge than we do, and that we know is impossible. You see? So, interestingly, even though we're now living in a secularized West, where the Judeo-Christian biblical worldview is not the dominant worldview in academia, in fact it's atheism, still they keep that date, even to this day. The Rig Veda, 1400 BC. Why? Because Max Mueller said so. Why did he say so? Because he was a bigot.
So they don't go back and fact check or verify in the academic world very much?
Not as much as you would think. The way, and Dharma Raja can especially tell us this, you know, the way that things work in academia, unfortunately, is a lot of it is politics. There are pet theories that will arise because certain great scholars came along with the theories. That becomes the set theory. If you want to refute that theory or overturn it, and I should say, it's more this way in the liberal arts than the sciences, because the sciences, of course, are more empirical. It's more black and white. But I'm speaking especially in the liberal arts, where a lot of it is theory. You know, theory of literature, theory of history, philosophy is you know, one could say all theoretical. I would disagree with that. Real philosophy is actually all logical. It's all propositional and analytical. But in any case, to overturn a theory that was set by a quote-unquote great mind in a specific field is very difficult. Many of the theories in Indology specifically have been challenged and have been overthrown. So, for example, you have the Aryan invasion theory, what was called the Aryan invasion theory, AIT. That was the theory also brought about by Max Mueller and the early Indologists. The idea that in North India you had a Dravidian race of people out of nowhere, and approximately 2000, 1800 BC, this group of people called the Aryans came in, this barbaric group, and they conquered those original people in the Harappa Indus Valley area, pushed them south, and essentially the coming together of these two groups produced what we call Hinduism today. That has been the prevailing theory that was the prevailing theory for a long time, not anymore. Approximately 15 years ago, that was abandoned. Then they came up with the Aryan immigration, or Aryan migration, Aryan migration theory. The idea that, well, okay, the Aryans were not these savages, you know, they didn't really conquer everyone, because there's no evidence of that, but we'll say they just migrated there. There's no evidence for that either. What is the theory that is now taking root as the correct theory is the Aryan indigenous theory. Those original people were the Aryans. Very simple. No separate people came in, either conquering or with love beads. Either way. But rather, the Aryans always existed there. The Vedas are indigenous to Aryavarta, to this original land that was there, very much pre-India.
Now, how much does Rama predate the Krishna? I mean, have they figured out about the time that Rama was?
Krishna was here. Well, he came to Earth approximately 5,200 years ago. Rama was here, and I could be off by 100,000 years or so, but Rama was here, I believe, approximately 1.3, 1.4 million years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
A huge time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. But they're both the two most important avatars, Rama and Krishna. Because, just due to lack of time, but also because of translation problems, I use the word writing down because there is no really word to describe it. Let me explain what I mean by this a little bit more clearly. When I say that the Shruti literature, what defines the Shruti literature is that it's revealed to the Rishi and then it's written down. What I mean is it's composed. So in other words, I should have used the exact terminology. The Shruti literature is directly composed by the Rishi. And there's a difference between composing and writing down. By composing, what's meant by composing is it is organized as a literature. But at that time, it existed orally. It didn't exist literally on paper. So I should have been a little bit more clear. When we think of writing down, we think literally of having a piece of paper, a pen, and you write it down.
Right.
Yeah,
The
that's
Rishi wrote it down.
right. That's not quite what I meant by with the Shruti literature when I say the Rishi wrote that specific work. What I really mean is compose. They composed it. Again, that's the difference. The difference between writing is that literally you write something down on paper, whereas composing means you take a bunch of thoughts, poetry, whatever you have, and you organize it as a work of literature. But it does, interestingly, it doesn't have to be written down to be a book. So to be a little bit clearer, that is what is meant by when it's revealed by the Rishi, they then take that knowledge and they compose it as a book. Now, when I say a book, of course, what comes to mind? A physical thing, a book like we have over there with pages, etc. That's not how books existed in the ancient world. What was meant by a book is that it was a composition, something that was organized, but it could even have been something that was organized, that was a book, but it didn't exist in physical form, it was memorized. Example, let's say I'm a songwriter, and at some point I'm just kind of, in my studio just thinking, and I bring together some lyrics, and I put them all together, and okay, here's the refrain, we'll repeat this a few times. Okay, I've just created something, it's a song. Now this is the thing, I haven't written it down yet, have I? No, it's in my mind, but it is a composition. It has a beginning, it has an end, it has a certain structure to it, it has a refrain, things that are repetitive within the structure of that composition. You see? Now imagine, if you can, let's say a pre-writing civilization before they have writing. To maintain that song, in other words, to not lose it, to pass down that song from generation to generation, I, as the creator, will now teach it to people in the exact form, and the idea is I tell them, don't change it, this is the exact form, it's a composition, keep it exactly the way it is, and then they teach it to other people, and then it goes down generations. That's how the Shruti literature came about, okay? But the important thing is it was composed directly by the rishis. That's the important thing. At one time, in fact, it's described very specifically in the last yuga, the last age, Dvapara Yuga. This is one of the hallmarks of how it's described in the scripture, that in the Dvapara Yuga, men and the gods could speak face to face. So the gods themselves would come to earth and be here. Yeah, it would be a very normal thing. Oh, the king is meeting with Indra. And people would be, very wowed, but they wouldn't be surprised. It would be kind of like the king meeting with the president meeting with Madonna or something. It's like, oh, that's nice, but certainly it can happen. It's within the spectrum of possibility. Back then, if you said, oh, the king is meeting with Surya, the sun god, it was within the spectrum of possibility. You see. So yes, things were very different. We've de-evolved tremendously since then. We can't even see ourselves. That's the greatest tragedy. We can't even see ourselves. What to speak of seeing the gods? It's more important to see yourself. Yeah. But yes, to answer your question, maybe we'll end things right after I answer this one last question. Veda is one, but it becomes divided at different times in history. Becomes divided, reunited, and only great rishis can do this. As a result, this is why there was a Celtic Veda. Several of them. The Druids had Vedas. They had massive works of literature that, again, they carried down orally, but they were composed works of literature that had poetry, that had history, that had medicine, that had philosophy, that had the stories of the gods and of humans, of the devas, of the manushyas, of the asuras, of the gods, of human beings, and of demonic beings. Had all their stories, their histories, who these beings were. The Celtic Druids had these massive works of literature. We know this historically. Many other peoples also had massive works of literature. This is the problem. The Druids, who were the Brahmanas, the priests of their people, didn't write them down. And then by the time Christianity came, the Druids were the first people to convert and become Christian priests, and they just forgot it all, and it never got written down. As a result, we've lost the Celtic Veda. The Brahmanas of Aryavarta, which is the real name of the capital nation of the ancient world, the nation that was the capital of the ancient world. It's not India, it's Aryavarta. They wrote it down at different times in history, but they wrote it down eventually. Eventually it got written. That's why we still have these books. So they were a little bit wiser in that they actually wrote these works down. The Druids did not write their works down. And there's a lot of literature that we know we've lost. There's a lot of literature that we've almost lost. The Kalevala, if you've ever heard of this word, it is also an epic Vedic literature of the Finnish people. We almost lost that, but we preserved it. All of these literatures were carried down orally. Again, they were composed, but they were carried down orally, and they were chanted in accordance with a certain meter. If you have a chance, look at this work, the Kalevala. I forget exactly how it's spelled, but you can look this up on Wikipedia. I believe, if you can find, there are even some videotapes where they have videos of people chanting this work in the original meter. And, the Druids did the same thing. They chanted their scriptures to a certain meter. But again, most of those were lost. So we're lucky we still have the Vedas.
Where exactly is Aryavarta now?
Well, Aryavarta doesn't exist, of course. Where was it? Roughly the Gangetic, what's called the Gangetic plain of North India, so the plain of the Ganga, of the Ganges River, including the Sapta Sindhu, the 7 rivers that flow from the Himalayas through Punjab. It includes the Himalayan region, it includes Nepal, it includes parts of Tibet, it includes most of Central Asia, what today is Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, all these places of Central Asia. It includes Persia, or at least large parts of Persia. That was Aryavarta.
The whole area was the capital
of the world. That was the head. Literally, the head of the world. That was where the Brahmanas originated. Aryavarta. This was the first of all nations. And very little is known by most Westerners, even most Indian Hindus, about Aryavarta. Very little is known, but it was an amazing civilization. And it came to an end with the end of the Saraswati River, with the beginning of the Kali Yuga. With the beginning of the Kali Yuga. So it came to an end roughly 5,100 years ago. And there's a lot more that can be said that's fascinating about Aryavarta, but again, don't want to keep people. Yeah, so whenever people who understand Dharma try to think back of a perfect era when Dharma blessed the world, but by being in governance, they think of 2 things. They think first primarily of Rama Rajya, they think of the perfect kingdom of Rama, but they also think of Aryavarta. And Aryavarta historically is closer to us. Rama was here over 1 million years ago, but Aryavarta ceased to exist roughly 5,000 years ago, roughly.
There's more archaeological evidence for that than there is to Rama.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's archaeological evidence for both.
Well, there is.
Yeah. Ayodhya, which was the capital of Rama, is there. You can go there. Yeah, you can go there yourself. It's a real place.
Or maybe the bridge between Sri Lanka.
That's still there, sure. Adam's Bridge, Ram Setu. Yeah, that's still there. But as far as Aryavarta, yes, you can go. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention Afghanistan was part of Aryavarta as well. I always forget Afghanistan. Yeah, you can go to any of these regions and you'll find remnants of Vedic temples. They're 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old, yeah. The remnants are still there. Yeah, okay.
We could do an all like recording for the video.
Narayanaaya vidmahe Vasudevaya dhimahi Tanno Vishnuh prachodayat Narayanaaya vidmahe Vasudevaya dhimahi Tanno Vishnuh prachodayat